All right, so I'm gonna continue with the stories, and hopefully, I'm gonna try to really understand everything and try to say everything I think is significant. So, like I said, there was a part of me that hated my grandpa, but also, at the time, think about it. I was being abused by my dad, and I didn't know it was because of the shoot away machine. I didn't know what was going on. So, as I said, if it wasn't for the shoot away machine, none of it would have happened. And why do I know that? Because, and this is why I always emphasize this, I was the best. Growing up, when I was in elementary school, I got straight A's. Middle school, straight A's. I went to Sierra Canyon for middle school, one of the best schools in the country. Straight A's. And not just straight A's. I was the kid that the teachers, I went to my creative writing class. My teachers fawn over me. How amazing I am. I'm the greatest thing that ever happened. The teachers always loved me. Straight A's. And it's not just straight A's. It's, this kid is unbelievable. Even in high school, I remember I had teachers that were like that. They were just like, how do you know that, Ryan? This kid is just phenomenal. In middle school, I had teachers that would be like, and I was at Harvard Westlake, one of the best schools in the country, but still the teachers were like, they just loved me. They just were like, wow, how do you know that? That was amazing. That was just incredible response. Wow. They were just, they were kind of flummoxed. They were just in awe. So there wasn't something wrong with me. And like I said, my parents loved me my whole life. And they didn't like my sister. So like I said, my parents went to my sister's soccer game, and they're like, my mom was like, Leah thinks too much. She thinks too much. She basically said, she sucks. She thinks way too much. And then my mom looked at me and she's like, Ryan never thinks when he plays. And also I remember one time my sister came home and my mom and dad were yelling at her, and my mom was like, are you on drugs? What's wrong with you? And they really thought that she was on drugs. And I remember I was kind of looking at it like, that's kind of fucked up. Because I didn't think my sister was on drugs. Maybe she was, though. You never know. But, basically my point is, my parents didn't like my sister, but I never did one thing wrong. And like I said, one time I accidentally broke something, and my mom started screaming at my sister. But then I told my mom, it was me. It wasn't Leah, it was me. And that's another, I was a good kid, right? I'm honest, what do they call, Abraham, or was it George Washington chopped down a cherry tree and he was honest. I was honest like that, But, but I was like, Mom, it wasn't Leah, it was me. I did it. And then my mom was like, oh. And then she didn't yell at me at all. And then I was like, wait, Mom, how come you were yelling at Leah, but you didn't yell at me? And my mom was like, because Leah's a bad girl. You're a good boy. Something like that. So my point is, my mom, now I'm studying this stuff, and they say that's, the psychology is bullshit. Most psychology is bullshit, but also there is some truth to psychology. But one thing that they call it is triangulation. So I don't know if that was going on, but when I look at it, what was going on was Leah really did suck at soccer. She really did suck, and I really was the best, and I never thought, right? So, I don't necessarily think it's necessary to try to diagnose oh, my mom she probably was borderline. No, she wasn't, or maybe she was, I don't know, but she was probably borderline narcissistic, and my dad was probably sociopathic, psychopathic, because he's a surgeon and they have a higher level of. No, to me that's stupid. It could be true, but at the same time, I'm not an expert in that type of stuff, so I wouldn't be able to diagnose that shit. But it'd be stupid to diagnose it, because what the fuck is there to diagnose? I got straight A's. I went to the best schools in the country. Fuck you if you want to diagnose me. I don't need diagnosis. I discovered the theory of everything. Diagnose me, you motherfucker. Never fucking diagnose me. So it's dude, I discovered the theory of everything. I'm very successful. Now, people might not recognize it at this point, but I'm very successful. And also, but I'll get to this. I could be doing big basketball, but what the fact of the matter is, when I look at it, is I don't need to diagnose anybody. My mom must have been a sociopath. No, my mom treated me really well my whole life. My mom and dad, they loved me. They treated me very well. The only problem happened because of the shoot away machine. And that's what I want to tell people. It's people want to fucking psychoanalyze and make all these complex shit. It's not that complex. What happened was everything was wonderful, but then my dad got the shoot away machine and he's telling me to do the wrong thing. He was, and I was the best shooter in the country. He didn't need to do that, but he's stupid. So we got the shoot away machine. He's had me pick the ball off the rack. And like I said, what originally happened is see, I'm starting to shoot overhead. Now, but I had videos of me shooting overhead and I'm just stepping into it naturally. I would have continued doing that if I didn't have the shooting machine. But my dad had me picking up off the rack and stepping like this and going like this, and that's going to make you square no matter what. And then my dad, but I was the best, so my dad just let it happen. So I just shot over and over again like this, right? But then when I lost my starting spot, my dad was already upset. He always be telling me, Ryan, Ryan, you're shooting square. But because I was the best, it wasn't a big deal. But then when I lost my starting spot my freshman year, my he's yelling at me, Ryan, you're shooting square. And I'm like, again, he was freaking out because I lost the starting spot. I didn't care. But he was freaking out. He's like, I'm never going to go to the games again. I'm going to kill the coach. And then he goes, Ryan, you're fucking shooting square. I give up. You fucking suck. And he goes inside. But I didn't know because I never thought when I played. So I'm just picking the ball off the rack and I'm going like this. Yeah, I'm going to be shooting square. So, but then I said, Dad, come on, don't give up on me. I need your help because he helped me my whole life. But that's when he first beat me up, right? He's like, don't ask me again. I'm like, Dad, come on, I need your help, man. Don't give up on me. Then he beats me up. Grabs me, throws me to the ground, has me in a headlock. You're going to ask again? And then that's when the abuse started happening. But my point is, it had nothing to do with like personality disorders and weird shit. It really just had to do with the shooting machine. Because then my dad was like, then later my dad would have me go out in the backyard. He's like, okay, pick the ball off the rack and then do this and spin sideways. Pick the ball and spin sideways. No good shooter does that. I shot sideways because of how I moved into it, but you can't move into it correctly picking a ball off a shooting rack. Good shooters a lot of times, they'll step back with their right leg and then step to, and it's a lot of stuff that you can't do with the shooting machine. With the shooting machine, you have to pick the ball off the rack and go like this. So it's not that complicated. and like I said, and my mom, did she have a personality disorder? I don't know, but the point is, the only problem with my mom was saying, Ryan, she went to my first games, Ryan, what's wrong with you? You're a shooter. Get your fucking head together. What's wrong with you? You can't handle the pressure? No, but she knows the shooting machine, so she thought there was something wrong with me, so she starts to get mad at me. So that's why I try to say, but look at it. It's not abnormal for my mom to be mad at me, because my mom's like, and my mom would tell me, she's like, Ryan, you're a shooter. Yeah, I was a shooter. So she's upset with me. So yes, if you think about it, probably in most cases, the reason why someone's shooting bad is because there's something wrong with him. But she didn't know it was my dad's fault because of the shoot-away machine. So in terms of like, so yeah, and then my mom's mad at me, and then my grandpa comes in, and yeah, it's just it was a perfect like cycle of crazy weird bullshit. And it's like, do I need to diagnose anybody? No, it's just a sad fucking stupid situation. Like my friend Tim said, he said, what seems to me like what happened was your parents joined a cult or something. And I was like, yeah, it's my grandpa. I think that my grandpa was the one who fucked it up the worst. But okay, so I'll get into that. So how I think that my grandpa helped, but also really hurt, because I wouldn't have discovered the theory of everything without him. So as I said, when my grandpa comes in, my grandpa's like, oh, Ryan just needs to accept and everything is fine. And there is, can't make things happen. And what Ryan really wants is independence. He came in from Kauai. He didn't know. He never knew me my whole life. So he comes in from Kauai and he starts to impose his metapsychiatry ideas. And like I said, he's so into independence and right-wing type of stuff, in my opinion. And I always saw it as right-wing white supremacist, because he'd be like, just accept. And I'd be like, yeah, that's like white supremacists. Like, yeah, don't try to change things, just accept. And he'd say, you can't change things, Ryan. Your dad doesn't want to shoot with you. You can't change people. And instead of being like, he and my mom would be like, yeah, you can't change us, Ryan. Just get out of our lives. You need to be in. Mom, can I come home? No, you're not going to change us, Ryan. You can't get your way. My grandpa would be like, Ryan, you can't get your way. And to me, that was always white supremacist, right-winger, because it's like, the way I saw it was like, when people are being abused and when people need help, what a right-winger would be like is, you just have to accept it. You can't make things happen. You can't get your way. You can't change people. And like Marx was like, no, you got to change. You got to change the system. You got to, if there's corruption going on, if there's abuse going on, if there's oppression, an outcome is revolution. So I was a very big Marxist, but I was always a Marxist my whole life because I always saw myself as Jewish, and I was always kind of anti-white. But I'll get into that. But that would change later. But my point is though, so my grandpa comes in and I felt like he messed things up with that. But at the same time, so I started living with my grandpa a little bit, right? I would go to live with him in Malibu, and he would be teaching me interesting stuff. So like one thing he taught, so I would, I would like him and I would not like him at the same time, because I knew in my mind I was always like, he's a white supremacist, he's a victim blamer, because he would teach like, there is no innocent victims, and and I see there's validity to that. Yeah, your software, your consciousness does affect your reality, and to say like I'm an innocent victim, it's not always the case. But when I look at it, in my case, I kind of was, but not necessarily, because like I said, you don't know your karma from previous lives, my grandpa would say, and also like I was a Marxist, but I kind of was an innocent victim in that I really don't think none of the bad stuff would have happened if it wasn't for the shoot away. But my grandpa's like, he would teach me interesting stuff. So like one thing he did teach me was, he was like, behind every aberration, there's a spiritual aspiration. Now, I hated spirit. I didn't really like spirituality my whole life, because I always, especially Christianity, because I was a Marxist and I saw it as white supremacist, and I'll get to that. But my grandpa was spiritual, but I was always kind of spiritual too. Like I remember I was with my grandpa one time, and I told him like everything is one, and my grandpa was like, "How did you know that? That's amazing." And I was, but that was like in middle school, one of the times when he visited from Kauai, and he's just like, "Wow, like that's your intuition's amazing." So I'm kind of like Anakin Skywalker, and my grandpa would be like Obi-Wan Kenobi, and he's like, "Wow, the Force is strong with you," But Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anakin Skywalker maybe had some from justification in recognizing that the Jedi were not completely good people. The Jedi also pieces of shit too. Everybody, there's pieces of shit on all sides, and that's the thing with borderline people. Borderline people will be like, no, there's only good people and bad people. There's black people, but what are the psychologists will be like? No, you have to be able to recognize that shades of gray and ambiguities and stuff. So even the Jedis can be fucked up, So, but my grandpa would be like, he'd be like, yeah, behind every aberration there's a spiritual aspiration. So I'd be like, what do you mean? And so like one example would be like, child rapists. Like Epstein, my grandpa would say, well, the higher aspiration behind that would be they want innocence. They want to regain their innocence by having sex with a child. So yes, it's an aberration. And now I understand. At the time, you see, he was a bad teacher, so it took years for me to understand the levels of software and stuff. But like, now I understand what he would say is, it is primitive software. It's dualistic primitive software in that it's very narrow, and and it has to do with sadism, like you're hurting something, and it's very self-confirmatory, and it's very sensual, bring sense gratification to the body, which is self-confirmatory and stuff. But and it's sadistic and stuff. But at the same time, my grandpa would say, but there's a higher aspiration, and that would be like oneness with the innocent, and a desire to reclaim innocence. And I think he gets that idea from from a spiritual book. It's a famous book, but now the name of the book eludes me. But but he would be teaching me this stuff, so I'd be like, okay, so while I think he's abusive, and I think he's a piece of shit in a lot of ways, in other ways, like he was introducing me to interesting ideas that made it so that I could discover the quadrant model. So I'll get to that. So I do think he was a big piece of shit, and I'll get into that in the future lectures, how I really think he was in a lot of ways a piece of shit, really evil piece of shit. But at the same time, I think that he also was very helpful. So he was teaching me that, and he was telling me like, so I would listen to this stuff, and he would be telling me like, Ryan, really what everybody wants is independence. So I didn't really quite understand. And again, like in college, when he would be talking about that, I'd be like, dude, you're just a white supremacist. And yeah, this is the white supremacist. Everybody should be independent and work hard. When I'm like, no, and my grandpa was a big Ayn Rand fan, but I'm like, no, welfare is good, dude. Some people need welfare, and especially the victims, especially the people who've been colonized, that's the way I looked at it. And I also, now, again, I saw myself as Jewish, so how much of that contaminated the way I saw things? But at the same time, they even say psychopaths are the people be like, yeah, people who end up being abused and stuff, they deserve it. And then they end up, abusing people. So was my grandpa a psychopath? Maybe he's a little bit of a psychopath. Like I said, my grandpa was kind of a piece of shit in a lot of ways, and I'll get to that. But, at the same time, I think it's stupid for me to diagnose. I think that really what it boiled down to was, it was a shoot-away machine, and everyone was confused. Because if it wasn't for the shoot-away machine, none of this would have happened. So my grandpa was trying to teach me, like, hey, really what you want. No, it wasn't because I wanted independence. It was because of the shoot away machine, and Dad was making me shoot wrong, and it messed up my shot, and I needed help, and I didn't know how to fix it. And really, I'm an Enneagram 5W4, so I just want to know. I wanted to know how to fix it. And it wasn't necessarily. My grandpa would be like, "Well, why do you want to fix it? Because your ego? Because your ego, and you want to. No, you need to transcend it." No, it wasn't because of my fucking ego necessarily. It was because I'm a 5W4, and they say 5W4s want to know. And really, when it boiled down to it, like, I really just wanted to know. Like, I wanted to know. What's wrong with my dad's telling me my shot's ugly? I never knew because I was always unconscious. So I wanted to know, how do I fix it? How's a good shooter shoot? And that's why I'll get to when I got videos. But so my grandpa was teaching me some interesting stuff though, but also he was doing a lot of stuff that I felt was very harmful for me and very bad for the victim. And I was a victim in the situation. You know, like, you get what you want, Ryan. You know, and now I understand what he's saying is like, what you want is not the flow, because my grandpa would say the flow is when you transcend the self, so you transcend your wants, and it's the most perfect way to do it. So to be in the flow, you have to transcend all attachments and transcend your wants. So you don't want to get what you want. You want to just be in the flow, and my grandpa would say, just work hard and just, commit, just stick to your commitments and work hard and transcend the self, and so that you can be open to the truth, and you can be transcending the self, because the self, and now I understand. My grandpa was a bad teacher, so it took me a long time to understand this, but I understood it more when I read Dr. Horace's books, but the self occludes you from seeing the truth and stuff. So if you transcend the self, then you could be more open to pure awareness or the truth, right? And transcend the ego. But so my grandpa's teaching me this stuff, but at the same time, like, I'll give like one example. Like, my grandpa's always very spiritual. And again, like, I hated, but I never told my grandpa this, but I always hated spirituality because I was a Marxist. And I saw spirituality and religion as white supremacists and maintaining the status quo. Like, I didn't like the idea of the afterlife, and I'll get to that. But because like Marx, I thought it was just something that maintains the status quo and keeps people in their place, right? So my grandpa was like, so I could always tell that my grandpa would be like, yeah, Jesus, he can manipulate the energy, and yeah, he actually could, manipulate. He can really multiply the bread. And in my mind, I hated Christianity, and I'd be like, okay, Grandpa, yeah, Jesus could do that, sure. But in my mind, I thought, Jesus was a fucking myth, you dumbass. You're a stupid idiot. Jesus was a mythological figure. That's the way that I saw it. But I'm not stupid, because I knew that I wanted to get stuff out of my grandpa. So I would just play along and be like, okay, Grandpa, okay, yeah, Jesus, he could manipulate energy. But my grandpa's thinking like that he's not religious because he sees everything as energy. But at the same time, I was just like, no, you're the same thing as religious people. And I also saw him as like gullible, because I was like, yeah, I always saw religious people as just gullible, and they just maintain the status quo. So I remember one time I was with my grandpa, and my grandpa was on a chair right here, and I went, hey Grandpa, because I watched a David Blaine thing, and on YouTube, and I forget what it was on. I think it was probably YouTube at the time. But and David Blaine showed how to do the trick where you look like you're elevating, where you lift this leg and you put yourself at an angle where it looks like you're elevating. Oh no, you lift this one. Yeah, like this. You cover it and it looks like you're elevating. And I went, hey Grandpa, I think because my grandpa's telling me how, if you're in the flow, yes, you can levitate and you can do all this stuff. And in my mind, I was just like, yeah, Grandpa, you're one of those gullible spiritual dumbasses. But I never said it, but I'm like, yeah, you're like a woman. That's the way I was looking at him. I'm like, yeah, you're just a woman, Grandpa. And it turns out my grandpa is an INFP personality type, which is mostly women. And I was like, yeah, you're just one of those gullible people. You're one of those people that will give your money to the church, and you're one of those people that will give your money to the guru who's like performing fake healings and doing all this shit. And you're just one of those gullible people. And you're a religious person. Religious people just get abused, and it's just a way to maintain the status quo, and it's just a way for sociopaths to take advantage of people. So I was like, hey Grandpa, look at me. And I said, I think I can levitate. And I went like this. And I remember I looked at my grandpa, and my grandpa was like this. He was like, he really thought that I levitated. And then I remember I was looking at him, and my grandpa was like, and in my mind I was like, he really believes I levitated. And he really did. And he was just like, oh, wow. And then, but the thing is, I'm not a psychopath. So I was like, I didn't want to be too mean. So I was just like, here's my grandpa, because my grandpa's thinking like, everything is energy. You're proving it. You're proving everything's energy. And we all, But I was like, Grandpa, I tricked you. Let me show you how I did it. And I showed my grandpa, and my grandpa was like, oh, okay. But But my point is, so my grandpa was teaching me stuff, but at the same, so I liked my grandpa, but at the same time I didn't, because my grandpa's teaching me interesting stuff. So like one thing my grandpa taught me was, he was like, I asked my grandpa, what are we, grandpa? My grandpa said, awareness. So I'll get to how like that concept helped me discover the quadrant model. But so I liked my grandpa and I didn't like my grandpa, so I'll continue.